and welcome to a new episode of IG Live with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C. And I am joining today by Stan Efferding. We are talking about vertical diet. So it's going to be fun because we're going like a rapid Q&A doing underrated, overrated when it comes to choosing sports nutrition supplements for performance. All right, let's move to a rapid Q&A with underrated, overrated on sports nutrition supplements for performance.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so magnesium, is that overrated or underrated?
I think it's underrated. It's real hard to get from food, so I think it's a great benefit. Plus, magnesium increases vitamin D absorption. It's great for sleep. I think that's one that most people should supplement.
Okay.
Yep.
Creatine?
Boy, I hate this one because I did a video saying creatine sucks, but that's it's because I eat a lot of red meat, so I get a decent amount of creatine. But I do recommend it. I think it's underrated for those people who aren't aware of its benefits, particularly for performance, for that first 10 seconds of the phosphocreatine, the ATP system. So I definitely suggest it.
Yeah, and creatine has much more benefits that go beyond just performance. And I think that is still coming up from research on like even everything related to brain health and cognitive function seems to be some associations with creatine as well.
Yeah, TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, concussions. Yeah, there has been some research on that.
Melatonin.
I think it's overrated, except for maybe jet lag. I think to take it regularly at home, I just don't think it's too terribly beneficial for the majority of people.
Okay. Adequate calorie intake or energy availability.
Yeah, I think that's underrated. Calories are king, as we discussed.
Yeah. Testosterone boosters.
Completely worthless. Overrated. Absolutely garbage.
Why?
They just don't work. They may have some acute effects within the normal physiological range for testosterone readings, but they have never been shown to benefit performance.
Okay. Hydration.
Underrated. I think that too many people don't. And hydration, meaning both water and adequate electrolytes. I think it's very underrated.
Okay. I got a few more questions that are more like general questions that the audience may mention that I wanted your opinion on those. So let's get right into them. In your opinion, how much fiber consumption you think it is too much or too little?
Kind of depends on the individual and their digestion and how it's cooked. But people who are dieting, trying to lose weight, as much fiber as they can tolerate, because it's great for satiety, and they can eat large volumes of food, fill their stomach up well, and stay satiated for a long period of time. People who are trying to gain weight, I actually try and reduce fiber because it's pretty satiating, and I need them to be able to eat more calories. So it just kind of depends on what your goals are.
My question with that as well is like, is there any concern when it comes to like perhaps a little bit of competition with or like impedance of absorption of certain nutrients if you're like overdoing it with fiber, and you might be reducing the potentials of absorbing iron or magnesium or other micronutrients that probably are not going to be greatly absorbed because of the presence of fiber?
There is some of that. It seems that the fiber inhibits the absorption of its own nutrients and not as much inhibits the other foods, the iron, say from heme iron. Like a spinach has a non-heme iron, and so it's poorly absorbed. It seems to have its own inhibition. But when you're eating, an iron source, say from a red meat, you're going to get much greater absorption. A significant consumption of calcium may impair iron absorption, which is what's interesting about something like spinach. It's high in both potassium and calcium, but neither one of them are absorbed as efficiently as you would hope because of that inhibition. But generally speaking, it'd be hard to overeat vegetables to cause a nutrient deficiency without first having a pretty significant digestion problem. You probably see that first, is you'd probably get gassy and bloated and just have and you know, and that's not to say that some people don't do that intentionally and just because they think it's good for them and don't mind walking around bloated and all the time. And that's not to say that you know, being gassy and bloated is bad for your health, but if the condition is IBS, it's very different. That's a painful, very painful condition. So I haven't seen a lot of issues with it in my diet, or any issues with it in my diet, because I do recommend you know, such a broad range of animal sources of protein sources that are really high in micronutrients.
And at the same time with fiber, the more consistent you are with your fiber intake, you build up tolerance as well. Like if you're someone who's not used to eating fiber, you can't just jump from 2 grams of fiber a day to 45 or 30 grams of fiber. But if you're someone who consistently eats a decent amount of fiber, 25, 35, and around that average, you're more able to manage and reduce that discomfort because your body gets used to managing that amount.
Exactly, and that's what we just discussed about lactose for some people whose lactase enzyme may be inhibited, or or they haven't had lactose in a while, milk in a while, dairy, so it's downregulated. Same thing's true with fiber. Anytime you make a significant change in your diet, and particularly if you're adding a whole lot of extra fiber or eliminating it altogether. I think Joe Rogan talked about when he went on the carnivore diet, he had diarrhea for 2 weeks. There's some adjustment in the large bowel for water and bulk that will manifest in your stool quality. And so you do have to kind of, generally speaking, you'd like to make smaller changes and titrate your fiber intake up over time to see how you tolerate it and to what point at which it becomes intolerable.
I agree with that. Now, in your opinion, is there a reason to worry about saturated fat intake in a surplus?
Yes, I think anything in a surplus can be concerning.
Okay.
When I work with large athletes, bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongmen, NFL linemen, and I have them in a calorie surplus, I try and keep fats pretty low because fats are more easily stored as fat. And the energy from protein and carbohydrates can be utilized for the benefit of. So I generally keep the fats pretty low when I bulk athletes. Anybody in a calorie surplus should be lower fat because it's just more easily stored as fat.
Okay, and it doesn't matter like if it's like saturated fats or like unsaturated fats, or you're still in the same stance of not having it very much?
We were just to try to distinguish between calories or fats in surplus. I think they're both problematic. We have seen in some research that the saturated fat in surplus can lead to a quicker accumulation of fatty liver, which then would, of course, result in insulin resistance, high triglycerides, all those other problems downstream. But generally speaking, I try and keep my fats. I keep proteins at 30%, fats at about 30%. Relatively lean sources of fats. You'll have a hard time exceeding 10% saturated or 15% saturated fat at the top. It's interesting. I often hear doctors tell their clients when they want them to avoid saturated fats to quit eating red meat. Well, top sirloin steak is about 30% fat, and about 30% of that fat is saturated fat. So that's 9% total saturated fat. By comparison, extra virgin olive oil has 10% saturated fat. So now, should you be sucking down ribeyes? Probably not. Bacon, butter? No. If you have an issue with LDL and you have to lower your saturated fat, you may want to avoid those things. Ice cream. There's certain things that are really high in saturated fat that some people need to avoid because they have a propensity to either accumulate too much LDL or they don't clear it fast enough. And in that case, but using lean meats, particularly like top sirloin, which I've come out of the gate, I've mentioned this for 10 years now. I've been saying about a 30-30-30, which really is 30% fat, 30% protein, and 40% carbs is kind of where I come in for performance. Will get you your AHA guidelines for if you're using lean protein sources for less than 10% saturated fat in your diet. It just happens kind of naturally if you're choosing whole foods. Most of the overfeeding studies are horrendous. They have like 750 calorie surpluses feeding you muffins that are 50% saturated fat from palm oil. So it's not a steak. It's not a top sirloin steak. It's not an egg. It's just probably 11 or 12% or 10% saturated fat, a whole egg. Even macadamia nuts are 14% saturated fat. So, and those are presumed to be healthy, and I would suggest that they are, but by comparison, I would suggest that top sirloin can be equally as healthy. It's lower in saturated fat. It's over 50% monounsaturated fat, and it's so much more nutrient dense than any of the other options I just mentioned in terms of its protein quantity plus its micronutrients with the creatine, carnitine, zinc, B12, iron. It's just, to me, it's a no-brainer. You got to be cautious to look at what the food choice is as opposed to just overemphasizing the one saturated fat in isolation.
Yeah. And would you say the same for added sugar?
Yeah, in surplus it's a problem, but in a deficit it's, if you're not in a calorie surplus, it's not a problem. Lane's covered this, extensively.
Yeah.
It's been one of his hottest topics. And, Lane said the same thing about saturated fat. He said it doesn't seem that when you trade calorie for calorie, that saturated fat has a negative effect on heart disease, but it's a matter of context. Are you at a surplus? Is your BMI exceed 30? Is your waist over 40? Do you have some metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, high blood pressure? All of those things that can aggravate cardiovascular disease. But there's kind of a hierarchy if you want to look at elevated LDL in terms of, or you want to look at heart disease in terms of a hierarchy. You're going to look at type 2 diabetes first. It's one of the most prevalent causes. You're going to look at just hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia. You're going to look at metabolic syndrome, which we just discussed, all the variety of different things that contribute to that. High blood pressure, obviously, can be damaging to the endothelial layer. Obesity, which we just discussed, BMI over 30. Smoking, of course, another huge one. Family history, another big one. Once you get down to the bottom of that list, you've got elevated LDLs. And that doesn't mean that they're not consequential. It just means that, as compared to what? So yeah, that in a nutshell. There's a big fight, of course, on now about, of course, with the keto community and the lipid community. It's not a carte blanche. You can't suck down all the saturated fat you want in the world and completely disregard your LDLs. But in terms of actual risk, I'm not talking relative risk. I'm talking in terms of actual risk. I think even the NHANES data, when you stratify for metabolic disease, meaning if you've got low triglycerides and a high HDL and no family history and no high blood pressure and no hyperinsulinemia, the risk is very, very, very small. It's not, it's not zero, but obviously a lower LDL would be better. But I want to throw all that out there so people can understand that a single lipid marker shouldn't ruin your day. There's a lot of other things you can do that are more important, and reducing saturated fat is one of them.
I agree.
Managing all those other issues is certainly should take precedent.
That's completely fair enough to say, and I agree with you. And are there things that you think over the years have changed when it comes to your stance on certain things? Everything that has made change your position, your view, your stance on previous beliefs?
If you asked me from 30 years ago, I've often said if I knew then what I know now, how much more I could have done at such a younger age. It took me a lot of trial and error. We didn't have the great information that we have today with the social media, and we didn't have as much shitty information either, to be honest with you. But we just didn't have much information. A lot of things that I did and I learned, I would dirty bulk and I got fat. I learned that lesson. I would over restrict, and that would include both, calorie restriction and cardio. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but I've been competing for over 30 years, since 1988, in bodybuilding and powerlifting. And so I would gain as much weight as I could to get as strong as I could to compete in powerlifting, and then I would lose as much body fat as I could to get as lean as I could. I've gained and lost well over 1,000 pounds throughout my career, albeit intentionally, to bulk up, to compete in powerlifting, and to diet down to compete in bodybuilding. And I learned a ton of lessons along the way, of course, along with training. Would have to be thousands of clients by now. I was a personal trainer. I owned a gym. That was my job for many years, just training clients every day. And I still train clients to this very day. And I just learned all these mistakes by trial and error. And then, of course, my poor clients had to prove as my experiment. But now we have the information. I don't dirty bulk myself or my clients anymore. I don't over restrict with a combination of cardio and significant calorie restriction. Meal frequency, I used to think was a huge deal, eating every 2 hours. It's not a big deal. I was powerlifting, thinking I was going to build big muscles, and that just isn't the case. Bodybuilding is a very different stimulus in sport, and you have to pay attention to science-based hypertrophy principles. I used to think when I was bulking, don't run if you can walk, don't stand if you can sit, and don't stay awake if you can sleep. That was the mantra, just to be able to consume as much calories as possible and not have any energy expenditure but for your lifting. And I just found over time, purely by accident, because I was competing in both powerlifting and bodybuilding, that the bodybuilding really helped my powerlifting, because it created a huge cardiovascular base from more sets, more reps, more volume, more frequency. And so I would recover faster from my powerlifting. When I powerlifted for an extended period of time and didn't include enough volume, and my cardiovascular fitness started to decline, and my hypertrophy started to decline, it would have a huge effect on my recoverability. We see this now in methods such as the West Side method that Louis Simmons talks about. There's a lot of volume involved in that people don't see. A lot of movement behind the scenes, and some of it's concentric recovery work. But you have to build a big, GPP base, general physical preparedness base, to be able to perform the amount of work necessary to become a great powerlifter and recover from it is one of the key components. And then not to be as susceptible to injuries, not to have weaknesses, because as a bodybuilder, you train every body part from all the angles. And so I was really strong everywhere, and I didn't have any weaknesses. So that was a big deal. So basically just moving more. And that's kind of why I throw in, do the 10-minute walks, do hypertrophy blocks, and then power training blocks. I even diet down my strongmen, my heavyweight strongmen and powerlifters. I try and get them to diet down at least twice a year to kind of restore their metabolic health, and kind of give their body a rest, both internally and externally, the muscles as well as all their blood markers, and then bring them back up. So those are probably the big things. I've tried keto many times, as most bodybuilders have, and I consistently lost energy and strength and size trying to do that, even though I was weight training, and it's so tiresome. Probably the biggest thing that I'm struggling with recently in just about everything that I say now, just about everything that's in my Vertical Diet book, and yours is on the way, I promised you. Just about everything I say in the book, I've been saying for over 10 years, probably since 2009, since I worked with Flex Wheeler. It was kind of a life-changing, when I worked with Flex and when I worked with Mark Bell, it really changed. It kind of took everything that I learned all those years and just set it in stone for me that this is the best path. And it worked great for me. It's worked for my clients. A couple of years ago, I recruited Dr. Damon McCune. He's a registered dietitian, a PhD in exercise phys. He was head of the dietetic department at UNLV. And we sat down and we spent, hundreds of hours together over the last 2 years to put this book together. And probably one of the things he's challenged me on the most has got to be my stance on seed oils. They are a toxin to me. I'm allergic to them. I get gastric distress when I eat seed oils. And I didn't know that for 2 decades. And I constantly had issues with digestion issues. And I would blame it on all sorts of foods. And it was really what they were being cooked in. Even I'd sometimes go to a restaurant and get eggs, and if they were ladled out of the bucket and the bucket was adulterated with soybean oil, it would give me gastric distress. And I was like, I just ate eggs, I eat eggs at home all the time. So it was really hard. I did acknowledge my bias in my video, saying that I'm biased. They are a poison to me. But there's a lot of research now suggesting that we can't identify any really chronic inflammation, which is, of course, the stance that Chris Masterjohn has taken, Dr. Mary Enig and Sally Fallon with Weston A. Price Foundation, Nina Teichholz, and a host of others have written about seed oils. But I've discussed this issue at length with Alan Aragon and with Dr. Andy Galpin, and they're not inclined to see that mechanism of action. But by the same token, they don't recommend them to people. What would you substitute them for? It's a highly processed food. It's usually, associated with ultra processed foods that are highly palatable, not nutrient dense, easy to overconsume. They're low satiety. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why I wouldn't put them in a diet. What would you take out to bring them in? And then, of course, my own personal experience with them. But there's a tug of war going on right now amongst I say amongst the academic community. The academics can see, or will suggest there is no argument that it's mostly zealots. And I'm in that group. I'm fully and wholly opposed to them. I would never suggest anybody eat anything that was submerged in that vat of boiling fat, oxidized seed oils. It's just not part of anything I'd recommend in a diet. Having said that, Lane's a big proponent of if it fits your macros, and if that's something that there's room for, probably not going to kill you. And I hate having to say probably, but you asked me what have I changed my stance on? If there's anything significant, I be cautious about the way I phrase things, and to and to express my experience. I said that in my very first rant. I said that at the in Canada at the I'm trying to remember now the conference that I was in up there. I said, look, I can only tell you my advice from my experience and that of my clients, and as it's relates to the science. I try and incorporate all of it, because anecdotes aren't very helpful, and neither are testimonials until such time that you can see it replicated in randomized controlled trials. It's hard to make those kind of statements broadly to a large population. But everything you asked me today, I said, well, kind of depends. Who's asking? What are their current circumstances? What are their goals? Like we said, calorie surplus, calorie deficit. So, there's lots of, digestion distress or not. There's so many questions to be asked, in order to be able to give somebody at least a recommendation. It might not even be a definitive answer. It might not even be the right answer. But here, try this. I say in my book, there's many paths to the same destination. And, it's just a matter of finding the one that works best for the individual client. And I try and show them what some of the pluses and minuses, what the pitfalls might be, and what the positives might be, and give them an opportunity. The worst thing you can do is suggest there's only one path. Then SIBO somebody into thinking that if that doesn't work, then nothing's going to work, because that's all that works. And that's what happens with some people who get, I think, too caught up with, say, keto or intermittent fasting. And when we know that 78% of successful dieters eat breakfast, so what does that tell you? About the fact that there's a lot of different ways to reach the destination. But if somebody tries a particular diet and it doesn't work for them, and they've been told that's what works, then they might give up, and then you lose the opportunity to suggest that there's might be something else that they can try. And so it is an experiment. People are individual. I've always said that what works for me might not work for you, and what works for most people might not work for everyone.
I agree. Such a great answer. Awesome.
Sorry if I blathered on. I don't know if we violated our Instagram time limit or not, but hopefully.
No, I think it's fine. It was amazing to see you. It was amazing to have a chat with you. I hope you had a little bit of fun with this type of Q&A, a little bit different. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm great. I enjoy it. I appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, I'm shilling a book, that's on Amazon and out in Barnes & Noble this month. And so any chance I get to talk about it, I'm happy to do so. I've gotten so much feedback. I've mentioned to you before, I've gotten over 50,000 DMs in the last 2 years. I'm sure it's a lot more than that now, from people all over the world. And, a lot of it's just people thanking me for information that helped them. A lot of it's questions, which allows me to see what type of information people are interested in. And then when I answer and they give me feedback as to how it worked for them, it kind of helps me determine what the best answers are for other people. I always ask them to tell me how that works, because a lot of the questions are the same, as you know, and we like to find out what's the best answer for most of the people that we deal with. So it's just I think it's a privilege. It's an honor to be able to help people do the kinds of things that I enjoyed doing throughout my career, whether it was gaining weight or losing weight, or performance athletics, or just general health, as I've gotten into my 40s and 50s, getting, lots and lots of blood tests and making sure that my numbers are good and my general health is good. But it's also a big responsibility. And I appreciate how hard you work over there, and understand that the things that we say can influence decisions that people make. And we have to be responsible with that platform. And so I continue with ongoing education. I attended the Barbell Medicine Seminar last year. I went to Mark Ripeto's seminar. I got my CSCS with the National Strength and Conditioning Association, all just within the last few years. And I just keep learning. I follow a lot of folks like you of course, Lane, I mentioned out in Oregon, Dr. Andy Galpin. There's just so many great sources of information, really intelligent people that train hard and are just brilliant. Greg Knuckles' stuff for Mass Research Review, I just can't get enough of it. And being able for us to spend as many hours as we do so that we can filter that information down to people who don't have that kind of time or interest, to be quite frank. They've got families and businesses, jobs to do, and this isn't their profession.
Or knowledge, because maybe you don't know how to interpret research.
It can take years, you're right. And I got a science degree. I've studied statistics and calculus and physics and chemistry, and and I still struggle with the research. And so I can't imagine how my customers feel, or clients, or just folks who happen upon me. And that's not to say that everything that I've said over the years has been accurate, but that was your question. How have you changed your stance? And really, it's about just trying to make sure that my message has enough nuance in it, so that I can address individual variations with people.
I agree totally. Well, Stan, thank you so much for being here today. I love seeing you. You're great. You're an amazing person. And I hope to see you very soon. Where people can find your book? I know there is a huge baby for you.
Yeah, Amazon. Go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And then I have, of course, my Vertical Diet 3.0, which is interesting, again, on that same question, how I changed my stance. I came out with Vertical Diet 1.0 4 or 5 years ago. And then I realized things are changing, or I needed to, more information came along. I made a 2.0. Then I made a 3.0. And I continue to provide the updates for free to anybody who bought a previous version. And communicate with all those folks that, but that's all at StanEfferding.com. My Instagram, Stan Efferding. My YouTube is Stan Efferding. I have a lot of those rants, free content, my Rhinos rants on YouTube. It's all Stan Efferding. And then, of course, we got the meal prep company. We're selling Monster Mash nationwide, right to your door, theverticaldiet.com. So I'm here to help if anybody needs it. And I answer probably 50 to 100 DMs a day, like you, I'm sure, do, for people who have questions.
Awesome. I sure you will get quite a few today. But I thank you so much for being here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'm so excited that I'm getting one for me. So yes, I will make sure I show you when I have it.
All righty. Thank you again for having me. Thanks for everybody for joining us. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you check this other video here. And also, I recommend you to check this book. Super, super cool, super great. Thank you, Stan, for sending me this copy to myself. And I highly recommend you guys check it out. And I see you on the other side.